I think we'll get started. Good afternoon. We are very pleased to welcome today Ms. Navi Pillay, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Monsieur Hervé Ladsous, the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, and Ms. Zainab Bangura, the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict. They are here today to launch a report on progress and obstacles in the fight against impunity for sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. As you may know, the findings of this report are the result of the monitoring work of the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office in the DRC, which combines both MONUSCO and OHCHR. The Joint Human Rights Office also has benefited from the close cooperation with Special Representative Bangura. And the report presents an analysis of trends in sexual violence in the DRC from January 2010 to December 2013. There are copies available at the entrance in English and in French. You will hear first from the High Commissioner, followed by the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, and finally the Special Representative. Then we will open the floor to your questions. As I don't know most of you, I would be very grateful if you could state your name and your publication and ask one question at a time. I know that's hard, but I'd appreciate that you do that. And I would like to let you know that we need to be out of here by 1:10 because the panelists or we all have other commitments. So the High Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me and my colleagues here today for the release of this very important report on the progress made and the huge challenges that remain in combating impunity for sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The UN Joint Human Rights Office in the DRC, which brings together MONUSCO and my office, put together this report based on its monitoring work on the ground and through very close cooperation with SRSG Bangura. Its findings reveal that rape and sexual violence in the DRC remain very serious human rights concerns and that thousands have been victims of these violations, particularly in the east of the country over the past 4 years. The report acknowledges the efforts of the Congolese authorities and the progress made in recent years in fighting impunity for sexual violence. However, it notes that much more needs to be done to hold perpetrators of sexual violence accountable. The aim of the report is to assist the authorities in the DRC in their efforts to fight impunity for these human rights violations, as well as to recommend appropriate steps for the DRC authorities and the international community to take in addressing these issues. During the reporting period, which is January 2010 to December 2013, the UN Joint Human Rights Office registered 3,635 victims of sexual violence throughout the DRC. Of those, the vast majority, 2,648, were women, but there were also 906 children and 81 male victims. Nearly half of the victims, that's 1,640, were in North Kivu, a conflict area. The youngest victim was only 2 years old, and the oldest 80 years old. Based on the information gathered, it appears that armed groups and state agents were each allegedly responsible for about half of all the cases of sexual violence that we recorded. Incidents of sexual violence were mainly registered during attacks on villages, alongside other human rights violations, including killings, wounding, abductions, and/or lootings. The report also illustrates the systematic nature of some incidents of sexual violence, particularly in the East, with a large number of cases committed in homes or when women are working in fields, going to the market, or fetching water. The findings indicate that rape has been used as a weapon of war to intimidate local communities and to punish civilians for their perceived collaboration with rivals in the struggle for power over areas rich in natural resources. The report also provides information on some incidents of large-scale sexual violence, including in Walikale, where armed groups raped at least 387 people, and Minova, where at least 135 people were subjected to sexual violence by the FARC. On Walikale, the UN Joint Human Rights Office issued 2 public reports and urged the authorities to take appropriate measures to investigate and prosecute the alleged perpetrators. To date, regrettably, there have been no prosecutions. Regarding Minova, on 20th November 2013, the Operational Military Court of North Kivu held its first hearing. 39 FARC elements, including 7 senior officers, are accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes, as well as other crimes and military offenses. That trial is ongoing. The United Nations welcomes the efforts made by Congolese authorities in recent years, particularly within the military justice system, which has resulted in an increased number of arrests and prosecutions for crimes of sexual violence. Commitments by DRC authorities to engage on issues related to sexual violence at the highest level have also been welcome, including the joint communique that the authorities signed with the UN in March 2013. Unfortunately, the political will at the highest level is not sufficiently translated on the ground. Not all Congolese authorities are prepared or equipped to conduct thorough investigations into all cases of sexual violence and to prosecute the most senior officers of the FARC. The severe lack of resources and human capacity also remains a major obstacle to the proper functioning of the judicial system in the DRC. Also, many victims do not report incidents for fear of retaliation, stigmatization, or rejection by their families and communities. Victims of sexual violence often lack access to essential health and psychosocial care, and legal fees and travel costs associated with formal judicial proceedings continue to impede access to justice for victims. In cases where victims obtain legal victories, they do not receive the reparations to which they are entitled from perpetrators and from the state. So there is still a long way to go in the fight against impunity for sexual violence in the DRC. I call on the government to prioritize the fight against impunity for crimes of sexual violence, to promptly complete effective and independent investigations, and to prosecute alleged perpetrators, including those suspected of having command responsibility. We call on Congolese authorities to establish as a priority a reparation fund for victims of sexual violence, to adopt without delay a law on the protection of victims and witnesses, and to develop a plan to ensure the enforcement of court judgments. The justice system must be provided with more adequate human and financial resources. It is crucial that we see more prosecutions of crimes of sexual violence. We stand ready through the UN Joint Human Rights Office in the DRC to continue our cooperation with the government, not least through the joint communique of March 2013, to strengthen the legal and institutional framework and to ensure accountability for sexual violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and let me join, ladies and gentlemen, Navi, in thanking you for being here today for the issuance of this very important report, which reminds us the extent to which sexual violence remains a serious problem in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. We at United Nations, of course, remain, as ever, strongly committed to working towards an end to sexual violence crimes, and especially rape as a tool of war. But also, we are concerned with the issue of the widespread impunity which has prevailed in the DRC with regard to those crimes. MONUSCO, as you know, has long been strongly committed to fighting impunity for sexual violence crimes. And you would have seen only a couple of weeks ago, the Security Council in Resolution 2147 upheld the strong mandate of MONUSCO to support the Congolese government in addressing the problem of sexual violence, in combating impunity, and in holding the perpetrators responsible for these terribly serious crimes. This report today outlines a number of challenges, but we must also acknowledge the progress that has been made on these issues. The support that the UN gave to mobile courts, to prosecution support cells, are two examples, of the positive impact that can be had on fighting impunity for sexual violence crimes. What remains important is that the government of the DRC takes complete national ownership and advances further on the basis of the important progress which has been made so far. Because it is true that they have taken, indeed, many positive steps towards holding perpetrators responsible, and in particular, perpetrators within the armed forces of the DRC. But beyond that, what has to be addressed is the root causes of impunity and all the systemic issues. They have to be addressed so that a sustainable solution to the problem can be favored and brought into effect. So MONUSCO continues to advocate and to support the Congolese government to strengthen and reform the judiciary and the prison system as a whole. There's no point, after all, in putting somebody, a perpetrator, behind bars for a short period when after that short period that person can escape and start committing the same crimes again. So it takes very important effort to make sure that a functioning and a fair system is in place, and that goes from the local police officers who listens to the testimony of the victims, it extends to the prosecutor, to the judge, and finally to the penitentiary system. So we are very firmly committed in supporting the government of the DRC to push ahead with the reform of the judicial system, to fight impunity, and, let's face it, especially in the provinces of the Kivus, to restore the state authority in those conflict areas. You know, we've been working on the islands of stability as MONUSCO, alongside the FRDC, is making significant gains against the armed groups. Well, when a particular area has been regained from the armed groups, it's very important that the authority of the state be materialized and be felt by everybody through, in particular, the presence of significant and effective police. So there are many things to do. I would give you a few examples: effective command and control, decent living conditions for the personnel, regular paychecks, adequate training. All this has to be put into force so that a professional army, a professional police can behave, well, in a professional way. So this all fits in with the reform of the security sector. And again, this is one area where MONUSCO has been taking a decisive lead. So, you know, it's a matter of working on the issues of substance, but also of dealing with the specific cases. And I would recall that the pressure on the government of the DRC by MONUSCO in the case of the rapes in Minova, I think, coupled with the very perceptible threat that we would cut support to FARDC, I think this helped in generate some positive results. But we must continue to make further progress. So today, I think it is important to highlight that this issue we are very firmly and together committed to deal with, and it's about, all the contribution we can bring to make it so that the eastern part of the DRC stops being the zone of lawlessness, of constant crime, of terrible drama, terrible human suffering that it has been for too many years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I join my colleagues in thanking you for your presence here today. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the Joint Human Rights Office in the DRC for this very comprehensive report. Today's report highlights, as you have heard, the many challenges that exist in the DRC with regards to combating sexual violence in conflict. But it also points to the progress the country has made in the last few years. As mentioned by my colleague, High Commissioner Pillay, the government of the DRC signed a joint communique with the United Nations in March 2013, in which it affirmed its commitment to addressing impunity for sexual violence crimes, including through high-level engagement by President Kabila and other authorities with my office. In the communique, the government also commits to ensuring accountability for these crimes, including through the strengthening of the special police units for the protection of women and children. Other commendable efforts include the naming of high-level focal points in the Ministry of Defense to work with the United Nations and other partners to ensure appropriate prevention and response by the military. The Senate has created a special commission on conflict-related sexual violence to advocate for sexual violence prevention and response and improve the legal frameworks where necessary. In a national address in October 2013, the President announced his intention to appoint a presidential representative on sexual violence and child recruitment to lead the government response. The engagement I have had with the government, from the President to the military leadership, to the judiciary, to the Senate, has shown that the country's leadership have strengthened their political will to address these violations that have hurt too many women, men, and children for far too long. What is required now is for this political will to be sustained and translated into change on the ground to protect civilians from this human rights abuse. The international community must also continue its efforts in partnership with various stakeholders to build the government's capacity to prevent sexual violence in conflict from occurring, end impunity for this crime when it does happen, and deliver reparation, justice, and service and support for victims. The High Commissioner outlined some of the many challenges that remain in DRC with regards to combating sexual violence in conflict, including barriers to the access to justice, the stigmatization of victims, impunity for perpetrators, and a lack of medical and psychosocial services for survivors. My office, along with UN Action Against Sexual Violence, a 13-entity UN network devoted to addressing sexual violence in conflicts, the team of the experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflicts, and MONUSCO work together to help the government address these shortcomings. Our goal is to deliver sustainable results through coordinated and targeted assistance from the UN and to ensure that a durable framework for rule of law is put in place. The team of experts includes staff from DPKO, OHCHR, and UNDP, and UN Action acts as the coordinating mechanism for the UN response. In support of the government's effort, the United Nations team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflict deployed a sexual violence investigator expert to assist the government through prosecution support cells. The expert has aided investigation in a number of major incidents, including the Minova and Beremana cases in South and North Kivu, respectively, regarding sexual violence committed in November 2012 by the FARDC elements in the aftermath of Goma's fall to elements of M23, as well as other major incidents such as the Katido case and the Kinshagana case. Helping the government realize its commitments under the joint communique will be critical. In this regard, the team of experts held a technical workshop in Kinshasa in July 2013 to develop an implementation plan for the communique. This framework will need to be supported as it highlights concrete actions that the government has committed to take to address sexual violence, in particular, the issue of accountability for these crimes. Peacekeepers serve as our eyes and ears on the ground. And over the past several years, the UN has worked to enhance the security sector's response to conflict-related sexual violence by ensuring operational-oriented training for peacekeepers and other uniformed personnel. To this end, the UN has developed and piloted scenario-based training to reflect the challenges peacekeepers face in the field. This training represents an important innovation in enhancing the operational readiness of security actors. I believe that our formula for ensuring effective national ownership, leadership, and responsibility for identifying and implementing durable solutions to this problem, coupled with support for these efforts by the international community, has helped us to move one step closer to our ultimate goal of eradicating sexual violence in conflict. Our emphasis moving forward is to provide appropriate, timely, and adequate services for victims, as well as livelihood support for survivors so that they can begin to rebuild their lives. It is only when the people of the DRC can live free of the threat of conflict-related sexual violence that the country can reach its full potential. If we can assist the government in ending impunity and providing the services and support survivors so desperately need, DRC can serve as an example for other nations working to end the scourge. I thank you.
Thank you. We have about 20 minutes for first questions.
Well, good afternoon to the panel. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, a warm welcome to you. My name is Sherwin Brycebees. I'm with the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Mr. Latsus, to you, sir. Insecurity in the East will continue to be the undercurrent that fuels the culture of impunity and the escalation in rapes in that region. There have been a number of new approaches in terms of MONUSCO, the Force Intervention Brigade, the introduction of drones. You have had some success against the M23. What about the other groups, the FDLR, ADF NALU? Can you give us a sense of what sort of progress is being made in terms of re-establishing a sense of security in that region? And more broadly to the other panelists, is it time for some tough talk from the UN in terms of holding those actors that have made promises and signed agreements, including the DRC authorities? Is it time for some tough talk from officials like yourselves when the actors don't act?
So should I start?
Yes.
About the issues of insecurity in the eastern part of Congo, yes, it remains a big problem. We went through a milestone episode when in the autumn last year, we actually neutralized the M23, and that was very, very important, both in operational terms and in symbolic value. But it is true that there are still too many spoilers operating, whether Congolese or not Congolese, in the Kivu's province and a few other places too. So yes, MONUSCO is resolutely and actively engaged alongside the armed forces of the DRC to go against what are, for the time being, the most troublesome and harmful, nefarious groups. That is typically the ADF NALU and the FDLR. But we also have to deal, and we do that whenever an opportunity arises or when circumstances bring attention to that particular situation against various my groups. You know, there are still too many of these people, and with the concept of that desire to establish islands of security, it's a strategy where we push a group out of a particular area and immediately DRC authorities have to move in to occupy the vacuum. And this, I think, includes, of course, getting the police, the Congolese police, back there. There is an important program to train 6,000 Congolese policemen precisely with the aim at filling this vacuum. And I think bringing all these elements together the efforts are paying so far, and we want to continue very actively and resolutely into achieving this over the coming period.
Well, I think the toughest directive comes from the Security Council to the DRC to address the issue of sexual violence. I recently met with the Minister of Justice and Human Rights in Geneva, and I fully appreciate all the challenges. It's a big country. It's difficult to protect witnesses. It's difficult for raped individuals to get access to health and treatment. And I'm aware of these challenges because I saw some footage myself of my own colleagues going deep into the jungles to interview witnesses. And how to get there is a challenge. There are no roads. And then I saw how they themselves are harassed. There's no light. It's pitch dark there by 4 p.m. I'm just giving you some of the practical difficulties. And you could almost see the eyes of the perpetrators through the trees watching the women, the raped victims who were being interviewed. So it's really terrifying conditions. We were very concerned about preserving the statements because my staff get stopped at the checkpoints and handwritten statements are taken away from them. So I understand the challenges. However, I certainly hold the government responsible for lack of political will in the delivery of convictions of members of the armed groups. I do feel they often escape justice. So there it's a matter of political will. You'll find in the report and the comments of the government, which are attached as an addendum, where they dispute the fact and they give a number of cases of officers who were prosecuted. Now, we're talking about convictions. So even the cases they give us is about prosecutions. So no officer has actually been convicted, apart from the ongoing case in respect of Minova.
Okay. Thank you very much. You spoke about the issue of the tough talk. I really do believe a lot has been done, and I think that's the reason why we have the progress which we're having. I have been in meetings at the African Union here during General Assembly or when heads of state visit, when the Secretary General actually made it categorically clear. So I've witnessed several meetings with the Secretary General, talking to President Kabila. Mary Robinson has taken the issue, not to talk about all our colleagues. The SRSG who is there is very tough on the issue of sexual violence. And I think that's the reason why when the dialogue process took place in Kampala, sexual violence, it was said that anybody who had committed sexual violence could not have any amnesty. When the amnesty law is passed in the DRC, it excluded sexual violence and human rights violation because the Security Council and all of the colleagues have actually worked very hard. And I think even with the Minova, 39 personnel from the military had been put on trial. That was not accidental. All your pressure here, bringing that issue up, the SGs and everybody, made it very clear to the DRC government that this is not something you can bury under the carpets. And I think all of that has made, and I think the last interesting one we have to take into consideration, when Minova fell, we saw what happened. And when the FARDC went back into the conflict with the M23, we definitely, because we had worked with the military and said to them, it is unaccepted, through us, through DPQ, we saw a drop in the sexual violence that were committed by the FARDC. So that is, it's not easy. This has been going on for the last 20 years. But I think somehow we see a light out in the tunnel. Thank you.
Yes, Evelyn Leopold. Do you have any figures of the sexual violence figures that you presented, of how many were committed by the state agencies, the armies, how many by the armed groups? And which armed groups, is that possible?
Yeah.
paragraph
I
20,
can see
paragraph
you, I can
23.
see you haven't read the report then, Pillay.
It's paragraph 23, page 10.
There you are.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you, and then you. Okay, go
Yes,
ahead.
Joseph Klein of Canada Free Press, and just referring to that data, which again is in paragraph 23, page 10 of the report, the Army, the FARDC, of course, spiked considerably in 2012. It's way out of whack with all of the armed groups. But even in 2013, it exceeds the level of rapes of any of the other of the armed groups except for the Mai Mai, and it's only back to the 2010 level. And also, according to this data, there's about a conviction rate overall in the FARDC of about 10% of the total number of perpetrators by the FARDC. So I guess I'm asking the panel, and particularly Mr. Lassoud, if this is really evidence of satisfactory progress under the Human Rights Diligence Program, and you know, there's been some reduction, but there's still a very high level here, relatively speaking. So could you comment on further steps that are going to be taken to get this number much lower? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I do agree with you. There is a drop. When you look at, if you look at the reports of 2012, you look at just the sexual violence committed by the security forces, both FARDC and police, and you total it in number, you can see that more sexual violence was committed by the state authorities than by the armed group. If you go to 2013, I'm sure when you look at the combination, you can see that when you total all the other non-state armed groups and with the armed groups, you can see that the armed groups are not the biggest offenders, not having justification for them, but basically repeat to what I've said, that the tough talk, the maneuver, putting the pressure by the Security Council, everybody. It's obviously we do not expect it to happen over a day, but we are hoping that as we continue to put the pressure, as the security sector reform takes place, because one of the things we've insisted when the security sector takes place, anybody who has committed sexual violence cannot be part of it. It has to be vetted and screened. So obviously it will take us time to wipe them out and to make sure that we don't bring those evil forces back into the security, and that will create a reduction in the causes of security. We are engaged with the military. We're going to have a discussion with them to have a command order that when a security commander, your units under you commit sexual violence, if you don't take action, then you are held responsible and you'll be accountable for that. So all those are ongoing discussions that are taking place. So we do believe that by the time we put into action all of the things that we're going to do, there'll definitely be an extreme reduction in the number of sexual violence taking place. On the due diligence, I think himself and Pillay might want to discuss that. Thank you.
On the due diligence policy, yes, of course, I did say in my remarks initially, you know, that one of the means we used to get the prosecutions in the drama of Minova was precisely the threat that we would stop any support to the Congolese army unit that had been primarily involved in those cases. And I think it has had an effect, and that is totally consistent with that due diligence policy. Another figure I would like to point out to is the actual number of convictions that were made in front of the military courts between July 2011 and December last year. That's just over 18 months. There were 187 convictions, which admittedly is not on the scale of the acts perpetrated, but is some progress. The one thing I would note with some concern is that 90% of those convictions applied to members of either the army or the police, but only 2% applied to members of the armed groups, when we know that the people of these armed groups are themselves responsible for such a large share of these rape cases. So there has to be something, to address this. But there is a trend.
Thank you very much, Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. Since the convictions, particularly of the very serious perpetrators, really aren't taking place to a significant degree, what about going to the International Criminal Court and really pursuing some cases there that perhaps would show an example? And as a second question, isn't really the underlying cause of a lot of these rapes the fact that obviously Congolese men feel that women are really second-class citizens and that something needs to be done to actually change that mindset that they can just go and rape women with impunity?
As you know, the ICC is already investigating and has charged people in DRC. The ICC indicts individuals. It's wide open to them to look at information in our report. But as prosecution relates to individuals. There's nothing to stop the ICC from investigating these. I hope that they pick up and follow through on this report. Although I want to make clear that the report doesn't necessarily represent the total number of cases of sexual violence in the country, because we just, although we of 18 field officers are deployed in 11 provinces, we only refer to cases of sexual violence which are considered as human rights violations, particularly those committed by state agents and armed groups. So the report doesn't give you the full story, which leads me to your second very important point, how women are viewed in DRC generally. I think it's a good start that the government has established a Ministry of Justice and Human Rights, putting the two together and putting a woman minister at the head of it. So this is part of her portfolio to begin a process of education starting at schools. But I think that my colleague Zainab Bangura has more knowledge of this on exactly what they're doing on the ground. But I welcome the establishment of this ministry.
Great. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for the briefing. I wanted to ask about MINOVA. I've been asking about it for about the 16 months since it happened, and it seems like it's being presented as a success story. So maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I wanted to ask you, Ms. Pillay, it seems like there have not been any actual convictions. There is a case going on, but 16 months after the rapes took place, MONUSCO still works with the 41st and 391st Battalion, which were implicated in the rape. So do you think this human rights due diligence policy, should there be some kind of a time limit, do you believe, for it to actually kick in, so if there are no convictions? And I wanted to ask Mr. Latsus, and I hope you'll answer this. It has to do with the mission in Mali, MINUSMA. There were allegations of Chadian peacekeepers being charged with gang rape, and it was said that it was sent to the Chadian authorities. It was said at this podium that they had finished their investigation, but nothing has ever been said what was actually found. And so, as sort of to know about human rights due diligence, do you know what it is, and have they been cleared? Thank you.
Well, we certainly do not present MINOVA as a success story. We're reporting that at least the prosecutions of 39 military personnel is ongoing. So the trial is ongoing now, so I can't comment on the outcomes. I'll wait to comment on the outcome. However, I am concerned about the delays in the trial. I understand that that's due to a lack of military judicial personnel. So MINOVA is a situation that we are watching very closely, and we're also ready to assist, particularly in the over the protection of witnesses. Okay.
On Mali? On MINUSMA?
At 13:10. It's after 13:10. So I know there's a lot of questions. Sorry about that, Joe. We'll try to find another venue and another format. And
On the rape charges in Mali.
you know what, Mr. Lee? I told you that this briefing was on the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay. And the report is in the back, and I hope you'll pick it up and read it. Matthew, I told you that it was.